Long before the rise of Great Zimbabwe, before the Portuguese ever set their sails toward the southern tip of Africa, before the gold of the inland hills drew foreign eyes, there existed a kingdom hidden between rivers and thorns, a place where stone met story and ancestors walked the earth as kings. This was Mapungubwe, a name that would fade from the tongues of men for centuries, only to resurface much later, when archaeologists dug through soil and time to unearth fragments of a world once mighty and silent. Set upon a high hill above the confluence of the Limpopo and Shashi rivers, where modern-day South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Botswana converge, the kingdom of Mapungubwe thrived in secrecy and splendor from roughly 1075 to 1220 CE. It was not just a settlement, it was a civilization, one of the first in sub-Saharan Africa to construct a society with a clear class hierarchy, sacred kingship, and long-distance trade stretching to faraway lands. And for a time, it was the very heartbeat of the region. No legend survived to tell its story firsthand. The people of Mapungubwe left behind no written chronicles, no royal decrees carved into tablets. What remains are shards and bones, gold and glass, burial mounds and burnt stones. The language of the earth, speaking softly of a kingdom where silence and authority ruled hand in hand. The rulers of Mapungubwe did not parade among their people. They lived above them, literally and symbolically, on the sandstone plateau that crowned the capital. From there, they looked down upon the plains below, where commoners farmed, forged, and worshipped. This separation between king and people was unprecedented in the region, suggesting a complex socio-political structure far beyond the simple tribal councils of earlier generations. Here, the king was not merely a leader. He was a sacred figure, a mediator between the spirits and the soil, a being set apart by divine favor and hidden power. The very hill of Mapungubwe became a symbol of this divide. A steep ascent separated the ruler's stone enclosures from the villages below. Archaeological digs have uncovered remnants of stone walls, ritual hearths, and storage pits, signs of both domestic life and sacred ceremony. Golden artifacts, including the famed golden rhinoceros, suggest a court that understood luxury and symbolism. The rhinoceros itself, small and delicate, may have held spiritual meaning, representing strength, kingship, or the animal totems of a ruling clan. Its presence, centuries later, would become a defiant emblem in modern South Africa, a reminder that before colonial maps were drawn, there was already order, sovereignty, and majesty on this land. But Mapungubwe's power was not built on isolation. It was, above all, a kingdom of trade. The Limpopo River Valley placed it at a vital crossroads between the mineral-rich interior and the Indian Ocean coast. From here, ivory and gold flowed eastward to Swahili ports like Kilwa, where they were exchanged for glass beads, Persian ceramics, and cloth from India and China. The people of Mapungubwe were part of a vast commercial web stretching across continents, even if they never saw the ships or cities on the other end. They measured value not only in cattle and millet, but in imported luxury goods that shimmered in the firelight of elite homes. Pottery styles shifted to reflect outside influences. Burial sites contained foreign objects, beads of blue and green, suggesting access to distant networks of prestige and belief. And yet, for all its outward connections, Mapungubwe was also profoundly rooted in the rhythms of the African landscape. Its people were farmers and herders, planting sorghum and millet in the rich alluvial soils during the rains and tending goats and cattle in the drier months. Their homes were circular huts with conical thatched roofs, clustered together in compounds that followed the natural contours of the land. They brewed beer, played music, raised children, buried their dead with care and ceremony. Life in Mapungubwe was not all gold and stone. It was lived in seasons, in sweat, in dust, in the quiet dignity of work and tradition. But kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. The reasons behind Mapungubwe's decline are still debated. Climate may have played a role. Around the 13th century, the region appears to have suffered from a prolonged drought, straining both agriculture and social cohesion. As rainfall dwindled, the once fertile plains may have turned brittle and cracked, pushing farmers to seek new pastures and rulers to abandon their thrones. Others point to shifting trade routes as coastal centers grew more independent and new inland powers rose to challenge Mapungubwe's supremacy. Chief among these was Great Zimbabwe, a burgeoning kingdom to the north whose stone architecture and growing wealth would soon eclipse all others. It is likely that Mapungubwe did not die so much as transform, absorbed by rising powers, its elites relocating, its people blending into new systems of rule and ritual. What had been a hill of kings became a hill of echoes. For centuries afterward, Mapungubwe was forgotten. Local folklore whispered of sacred hills and cursed lands, but colonial explorers passed the ruins by without notice. It was not until the 1930s that South African scholars began to excavate the site seriously. And even then, the full importance of what they found was deliberately downplayed under the apartheid regime. After all, here was clear, irrefutable evidence of a highly advanced, stratified African civilization predating European contact. A society that built in stone, worked in gold, traded across oceans, and buried its kings with the same reverence seen in Egypt or Mesopotamia. To acknowledge this was to shatter the myths upon which colonial superiority was built. So the truth of Mapungubwe was buried again, not under earth, but under silence. That silence has since begun to lift. Mapungubwe is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and its artifacts are displayed in museums where their brilliance can no longer be ignored. The golden rhinoceros gleams once more, not just as a symbol of lost sovereignty, but as a testament to what was and what might have been. Scholars continue to study the site, uncovering new layers of meaning in its patterns, bones, and walls. Indigenous knowledge systems are being revisited, revalued, and reconnected to the landscape. And perhaps, most importantly, people across southern Africa are reclaiming the narrative, asserting that their history did not begin with colonization, but with kingdoms carved in stone and shaped by stars. Mapungubwe teaches us that civilization does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it leaves behind only gold figures, shattered pots, and ghostly outlines in the soil. But even in ruin, it speaks of a people who once ruled from above, who saw themselves as chosen, who traded with the farthest lands and governed with rituals known only to the earth and sky. It was a kingdom that left no chronicles yet still tells a story, if only we listen. On the windswept peaks where Anatolia fades into the mountains of Mesopotamia, where clouds drift like silent watchers above stone altars and shattered statues, there once stood a kingdom carved out of contradiction, born of both Greece and Persia, ruled by men who claimed descent from Alexander the Great and Darius the Great alike. The kingdom of Commagene was small, but its ambition was vast. Tucked between great empires, it defied erasure not by strength of arms alone, but by wielding culture as a blade and memory as a shield. It was a kingdom of hybrids, not confused but deliberate. A people who stitched the old world and the new together in the seams of their stones and the silence of their tombs. The land itself did not offer easy prosperity. Craggy, dry, and windswept, Commagene sat at the crossroads of what is now southeastern Turkey, too remote to dominate Anatolia, too wild to be fully absorbed by the empires that rose and fell around it. Yet it was precisely this in-betweenness that gave Commagene its power. To the east loomed the Parthians and the old Persian traditions. To the west, Rome and Hellenistic Greece. Commagene looked both ways and said, "We are of both." Our gods were Greek robes and Persian crowns. Our kings speak in syllables of Homer and Zoroaster alike. And from that synthesis, a strange and brilliant sovereignty emerged. Its most iconic voice was King Antiochus I Theos, who reigned in the 1st century BCE and whose grand vision for his kingdom still echoes today. Thousands of years later, in the frozen faces of gods and lions atop Mount Nimrod, Antiochus was not merely a ruler. He was a philosopher of monarchy, a man obsessed with lineage, divinity, and legacy. He believed he had the blood of gods in his veins, and so he built for eternity. On the summit of Mount Nimrod, more than 2,100 meters above sea level, he commanded a tomb sanctuary to be built, a necropolis unlike any in the world. There, seated among colossal stone figures, his own likeness sits beside Zeus and Mithras, Apollo and Ahura Mazda, suggesting not only divine right, but divine membership. Antiochus declared himself kin to gods, and in stone he wrote that claim into permanence. The sculptures of Nimrod are silent now, their heads toppled by time and tremor, lying like discarded masks across the plateau. But their silence speaks. Each statue once stood over 30 feet tall, seated on thrones with fierce serenity, gazing over the land as if to bless it or judge it. Between them, the bodies of eagles and lions suggest protection and power, astral symbols of divine authority. There are inscriptions too, long, ceremonial texts carved in Greek, proclaiming Antiochus' heritage, his love for peace, his devotion to gods both Eastern and Western, and his desire for his tomb to be a place of worship forever. It was to be a hierothesion, a sacred seat of memory, where kings and gods might speak to one another across the chasm of mortality. But Commagene was not only monument in myth. It was a functioning kingdom, diplomatically shrewd and economically viable, trading along caravan routes that moved goods between Asia and the Mediterranean. It minted its own coins, balancing Eastern and Western iconography with deliberate care. The rulers wore Persian trousers and Greek diadems. The language of court may have leaned Greek, but the soul of the land remained tethered to the east. Commogene's kings married into powerful dynasties and played larger powers against one another like pieces on a board, all to preserve a fragile independence. It was a balancing act, constantly tested by the shifting tides of Rome's imperial hunger and Parthia's lingering reach. Inevitably, such a balancing act could not last forever. Commogene's independence began to erode under Roman pressure. After Antiochus I, subsequent kings tried to maintain the kingdom's sovereignty while aligning more clearly with Roman interests. It was a dangerous dance. At times, they were client kings, tolerated and even admired by Roman emperors. At others, they were treated as suspect, their autonomy viewed as an inconvenience. In 72 CE, under Emperor Vespasian, Commagene was finally annexed and turned into a Roman province. Its royal line was extinguished, its independence erased. What had been a beacon of cultural fusion became just another piece in the imperial puzzle. But the stones of Mount Nemrut did not crumble. The sanctuary remained, buried beneath centuries of snow, sand, and forgetfulness. Shepherds and travelers whispered of strange gods atop the mountain. For generations, the kingdom of Commagene lay silent, its memory surviving only in broken statues and half-buried scripts. Not until the 19th century did European explorers rediscover Nemrut's summit. When they did, they were stunned. Here was a site like no other, neither wholly Hellenistic nor clearly Persian, grand yet remote, reverent yet ego-driven. A mystery carved into mountaintop solitude. And even now, Commagene resists full understanding. It is too much and too little, too Greek to be Eastern, too Persian to be Western. But in that very contradiction lies its brilliance. It refused to be defined by the lines drawn by greater empires. It asserted its identity by fusing the cultures around it, not flattening them. Its gods were many, but unified. Its kings were human, but divine in ambition. And its legacy is written not in the victories of war or the breadth of territory, but in the stubborn endurance of its vision. That identity can be plural, sacredness can be sculpted, and memory, if carved deeply enough, can outlive even the empires that sought to erase it. Today, the wind still howls across the peak of Mount Nemrut. Tourists make the long climb to stand before the silent heads of gods and kings. The sun rises and sets over their stony faces, casting shadows that change but never fade. And somewhere in that silence, in that high and lonely place, the voice of Commagene still murmurs, not in words, but in stone, that even forgotten kingdoms were once whole, once proud, and once certain they could shape eternity. In the deep past, before the rise of Babylon, before Assyria carved its name in fear, before even the myth of Troy had taken root in distant lands, there stood a kingdom to the east, old when others were young, shadowed now by history, but once blazing with ambition and power. This was Elam, a name whispered from cuneiform tablets and forgotten stone, the first great civilization of what we now call Iran, where Mesopotamia birthed cities along the Tigris and Euphrates. Elam rose in the highlands beyond, a rival, a mirror, a mystery. Its roots stretch back to the 3rd millennium BCE, long before the birth of Christ, long before empires could imagine the scale of the world they might rule. The Elamites built their cities in the fertile plains of Kazakhstan, in places like Susa, a name that would echo for thousands of years through conquest, poetry, and ruin. Susa was more than a city, it was a symbol, a capital not merely of power, but of endurance. For over 2,000 years, kings ruled from there. Dynasties fell, but Susa stood. War came, but Susa endured. Time moved on, but Susa remained. Elam did not rise in isolation. It stood shoulder to shoulder with the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, sometimes in alliance, more often in war. It was never an empire in the modern sense. It did not seek to stretch endlessly outward. Instead, it focused inward, cultivating art, religion, language, and a style of governance both strange and structured. The Elamites developed their own script, unrelated to the cuneiform of their neighbors. Their language, Elamite, has no known relatives. It speaks from clay and syllables that still baffle linguists, a ghost tongue from a vanished people. Yet their culture was anything but primitive. The Elamites built ziggurats, step pyramids that reached toward the heavens. They adorned their temples with intricate statues and religious carvings, and they practiced a religion that fused animal spirits, gods of nature, and perhaps even deified rulers. Their burial customs suggest a belief in the sacred continuity of royal blood. Kings laid beside kings, generations sealed in stone chambers deep beneath the earth. They worshipped in silence, governed through family alliances, and kept the past alive not with stories, but with walls. Power in Elam was dynastic, yet also often shared, a concept foreign to their neighbors. Brothers ruled together. Sons succeeded fathers, but not always through primogeniture. At times, queens held authority, particularly when dynasties shifted or alliances cracked. It was a society in flux, adapting to the chaos of the ancient world, not by mimicking Mesopotamia, but by holding to its own course. Where Babylon sought domination through religion and empire, Elam endured through independence and resilience. Their greatest kings left echoes that still pulse faintly through time. Untashnapirisha, for example, who ruled in the 13th century BCE, built the city of Dur-Antash, known today as Chogazambil, a massive complex centered around one of the best preserved ziggurats in the world. It still stands, its bricks stacked layer upon layer, rising out of the desert like a fossilized flame. There, he hoped to create a new religious center, perhaps a new beginning. But history is never kind to dreams built in stone. The city was abandoned after only a few generations. Yet the ziggurat remains, an ancient stairway to nowhere, a monument to what once was. But Elam was not only a builder of cities. It was a kingdom of war and vengeance. Time and again, it clashed with Mesopotamia. It struck at Akkad, challenged Babylon, and at times even conquered it. The Elamites famously captured the Babylonian king Hammurabi's successor and carried away the steel of the law, that great black stone etched with legal codes and topped by the image of a king receiving justice from the gods. They took it not to destroy it, but to claim its power, to say we too are lawgivers. We too are the heirs of order. That very steel now sits in the Louvre, found not in Babylon, but in Susa, Elam's silent testament to a forgotten supremacy. Yet empires are never still. By the first millennium BCE, Elam's strength began to wane. Assyria, ever hungry, turned its gaze eastward. The Elamites resisted as they always had, with tenacity, pride, and sudden bursts of violence. They burned Babylon in alliance with Chaldeans. They sheltered rebels. They struck at supply lines. But the tide had turned. In 647 BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal launched a devastating campaign. Elamite cities were razed, temples looted, kings flayed, and hung from gates. Susa, that eternal city, was smashed, its palaces burned, its treasures seized. Ashurbanipal even commissioned reliefs showing the looting of Susa as a point of pride. Elam is no more, he declared, and for a time it was true. The independent Elamite kingdom never fully recovered. What remained was folded into new powers, into Persia, into Parthia, into memory. Yet Elam was not fully erased. Its blood ran through the veins of its conquerors. The Achaemenid Persians, who would one day challenge Greece and shape the known world, built their palaces in Susa. Darius the Great held court there. Xerxes walked its halls. The Elamite language remained in use in the Persian administration for centuries, appearing beside Old Persian and Akkadian on royal inscriptions. The ghost tongue became a language of empire. Long after the kingdom that birthed it was gone. Even Alexander the Great, when he conquered Persia, came to Susa. He staged weddings there, binding Macedonian and Persian nobility in a theatrical attempt at unity. He walked in the shadow of a city older than anything his culture could imagine. He may have believed he had conquered the world, but he had only inherited its ruins. Today, Elam lies beneath layers of earth and time. Chogazambil rises from the dust, silent and stern. Susa is a site of archaeological excavation, its walls exposed like old bones, its treasures scattered in museums far from home. The Elamite language is studied by few. Its texts are limited, its grammar incomplete. We know it existed, but not quite what it meant to speak it. We read it like voices underwater, muffled, blurred, fading. Yet Elam endures, not in dominance, but in depth. It reminds us that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is whispered by the ruins. It teaches that greatness is not measured only in expansion or conquest, but in how a people shape their world, through art, through ritual, through the stubborn choice to be different when surrounded by sameness. Elam was not Mesopotamia. It was never meant to be. It stood apart. It endured beside giants and sometimes cut them down. It built not for fame, but for forever. And though it did not survive in power, it survives in memory, scattered, yes, but present, etched into brick, buried beneath dust, echoing in ziggurats that still hold the sky. Long before the Roman legions carved roads across Europe, before Caesar's name was whispered like thunder beyond the Alps, before the idea of a united empire ruled from marble palaces had taken hold, there was a fierce, forested land in the shadows of the Carpathians, a realm of mountains and rivers, of gold buried deep in stone and warriors carved from the same. Dacia, not a myth, not a legend, but a kingdom of defiance. A name that once echoed through Rome as both threat and temptation. A land ruled by men who wore their hair long, their beards wild, their resolve unbroken. This was the world of the Dacians, forgotten by many, but once feared by all. The Dacians were not a scattered tribe or a nameless people. They were organized, political, hierarchical. They worshipped gods older than Latin, and they practiced a form of stoicism and pride that seemed both barbaric and oddly refined to the Romans who faced them. Their high priest, or Zelmoxian figure, was as central to their state as their king. They believed in immortality of the soul. Death was not feared but welcomed. A warrior who fell in battle did not perish. He merely returned to the divine. This belief made them dangerous. You cannot conquer a people who do not fear death. You can only outlast them. The Dacians lived in fortified hilltop cities, known as Davii. These were not crude stockades, but stone-built citadels, defended by terraces, watchtowers, and wooden palisades, all designed with a level of military sophistication that shocked Roman observers. In the heart of Transylvania and beyond, these cities stood like the bones of the earth, weathering time and assault. Sarmizetitusa, the capital, was more than a fortress. It was a spiritual center, an administrative hub, and a marvel of Dacian engineering. A mountain stronghold laced with sacred geometry, solar alignments, and hidden altars where warriors came to speak to the gods. But Dacia's power was not only in spirit or stone. It lay beneath the mountains, in veins of gold and silver that made emperors salivate. The Dacians had access to some of the richest mineral deposits in all of Europe. They knew how to extract them, how to work metal, how to mint coinage. Their artisans crafted jewelry of such precision and elegance that it rivaled Roman work. Gold torque necklaces, spiral bracelets, and ornate helmets were buried with their dead or worn into battle, not for vanity, but as a symbol of divine right and eternal power. Their greatest leader, and the man who turned Dacia from a confederation into a kingdom, was Decebalus, a name etched in Roman history with grudging respect. Decebalus was more than a warrior. He was a strategist, a negotiator, a ruler who could bend tribes to his will and play empire against empire. In the late 1st century CE, when Rome was at its most expansive, it ran into a wall of resistance in Dacia. Under Domitian, the Romans attempted invasion and failed. Decebalus beat them back, forcing Rome into an uneasy peace that included tribute payments. Imagine that, mighty Rome paying off a barbarian king. It was a humiliation the emperors would not forget. But Decebalus was no fool. He used Rome's money not for decadence, but for defense. He built new fortresses, reinforced mountain passes, and trained his warriors in tactics learned from Rome itself. He played the long game, knowing that peace with Rome could never last. In 101 CE, the inevitable came. Emperor Trajan, one of Rome's most capable leaders, launched a massive campaign into Dacia. The war was brutal. Dacian guerrilla tactics met Roman disciplina. Cities were burned. Rivers ran red. In 102, Decebalus was forced into a treaty, but he broke it as soon as Rome withdrew. He knew Rome respected strength, not compliance. Trajan returned in 105 with a vengeance. This time, he came not just to punish, but to erase. The Second Dacian War was relentless. Sarmizetitusa was besieged. the sacred fire extinguished, Dacian unity shattered. Decebalus fled, pursued through forests and ravines. When capture became inevitable, he chose suicide over chains, slicing his own throat near the banks of a river. His head was brought to Rome. His body lost to history, but his legacy, it endured. Trajan celebrated his victory with a monument that still stands, Trajan's Column in Rome. Spiraling up the marble shaft are images of the Dacian wars. Soldiers marching, sieges underway, battles raging. But look closely, and you will not see triumphalism. You will see respect. The Dacians are not depicted as savages. They are proud, tall, and fierce. Noble foes who pushed Rome to its limits. It is the ultimate Roman tribute, to carve your enemy's likeness in stone, so that he may never be forgotten. After the conquest, Dacia became a Roman province. Colonists came. Latin was spoken. Cities were rebuilt in Roman fashion, complete with forums, baths, and temples. But the Dacians were not erased. Their blood mixed with that of the settlers. Their language, customs, and spirit endured underground. Even today, in modern Romania, echoes of Dacia live on. The name itself, Romania, speaks to Rome's legacy. But the land remembers Decebalus. Statues of him rise from cliffs. His name is taught in schools. He is no longer the enemy. He is the ancestor. And still, there is more to the Dacians than war. Their religious life was rich, complex, and mysterious. They built sacred sanctuaries aligned with the solstice. They believed in purification through fire and water. Their altars were places of transformation, not sacrifice, but revelation. They had a priesthood that advised kings, and a belief that the world was not random, but ordered by divine reason. Even the Romans, with their pantheon of gods, admitted that Dacian spirituality was profound, alien, yes, but not primitive. They saw in it a kind of wisdom that could not be conquered. Today, the ruins of Dacia still cling to the mountains. Overgrown, crumbling, quiet, but not silent. Sarmizegetusa Regia, with its concentric circles and great stone altars, draws pilgrims and archaeologists alike. Each stone speaks a word. Each wall remembers. The Dacians may have lost their kingdom, but they did not lose their soul. They became part of something larger, not by erasure, but by integration. Their story is one of resistance, not defeat, of identity, not assimilation. And in the end, that is the legacy of Dacia. A kingdom born in wilderness, forged in war, and immortalized in marble by the very empire that sought to destroy it. It is a lesson written not in conquest, but in memory, that a people who live with pride, who fight with conviction, who die with honor, can never truly vanish. Their echoes will always remain in mountains, in rivers, in the stories we tell when the fire burns low and the past feels near. Long before the modern nations of Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania solidified their borders, there existed a kingdom that stood as a beacon of strength, culture, and political influence in Eastern Europe, the Kingdom of Galicia, Volhynia. Nestled between mighty rivers, dense forests, and fertile plains, this medieval Slavic kingdom thrived at the crossroads of empires and cultures. It was a land both shaped by and shaping the tides of history, fierce enough to resist invaders, cultured enough to nurture art and faith, and complex enough to carve out a unique identity amidst the clashing forces of the East and West. The story of Galicia, Volhynia, begins in the wake of the Kievan Rus, the great federation of Slavic tribes that once ruled vast stretches of Eastern Europe. By the 12th century, Kievan power waned under the pressure of internal strife and external threats, notably the Mongol invasions. Amidst this fragmentation, the principalities of Galicia and Volhynia, situated roughly in what is now western Ukraine, united to form a formidable state. This new kingdom inherited the legacy of Kievan Rus, but soon evolved beyond its shadow into a power with its own voice, ambitions, and destiny. Galicia and Volhynia were not mere political units. They were lands steeped in diversity. The region was home to Slavic peoples, Ruthenians, and various Baltic and Turkic groups, all interacting within a landscape where Orthodox Christianity, Roman Catholicism, and pagan beliefs intertwined. This religious and ethnic mosaic contributed to the kingdom's vibrant culture, but also to its complex diplomatic relations. For centuries, Galicia, Volhynia found itself balancing on the knife edge between Poland and Hungary to the west, the Mongol Golden Horde to the east, and the Lithuanian Grand Duchy to the north. One of the defining rulers of this kingdom was Danilo Romanovich, Daniel of Galicia, a figure both warrior and diplomat, saint and sovereign. Rising to power in the early 13th century, Danilo sought to transform Galicia, Volhynia, from a fragmented territory into a centralized, respected kingdom. His reign was marked by both martial courage and visionary statecraft. Under threat from the Mongols, who ravaged much of Eastern Europe, Danilo mounted defensive campaigns that repelled invasions and maintained the kingdom's autonomy. He also pursued alliances with Western powers, including the papacy, seeking to secure recognition and support by aligning with the Catholic world while preserving his Orthodox roots. In 1253, Danilo's efforts culminated in his coronation as King of Ruthenia by a papal legate, a symbolic moment that marked Galicia, Volhynia's entry onto the European stage as a legitimate kingdom. This event was no mere ceremony. It was a statement of sovereignty and ambition, asserting the kingdom's right to be counted among the established monarchies of Europe. For Danilo, this recognition was a diplomatic triumph, enabling him to negotiate treaties, trade agreements, and marriages that enhanced his realm's security and prosperity. Yet the kingdom of Galicia, Volhynia, was more than battles and crowns. It was a crucible of cultural synthesis. The kingdom's cities, such as Halych and Volodymyr, flourished as centers of commerce and learning. Merchants from across Europe and Asia converged on these urban hubs, trading goods as diverse as furs, honey, wax, and fine cloth. The Silk Road's eastern branches funneled exotic spices and silks into its markets, while Byzantine and Western European influences shaped its architecture, art, and religious life. Churches and monasteries, both Orthodox and Catholic, dotted the landscape, their frescoes and manuscripts bearing witness to a rich spiritual heritage. The kingdom's legal system was notable for its sophistication. The Galician Volhynian Chronicle, a historical text written by local monks, not only records the kingdom's events, but reflects the intellectual life of the time. It reveals a society that valued law, order, and the codification of customs, blending Slavic traditions with broader European medieval practices. This legal foundation helped maintain internal stability amid external pressures. Galicia, Volhynius' military prowess was integral to its survival. Its warriors were known for their skill in cavalry combat, adept at both defensive tactics against nomadic steppe invaders and offensive campaigns into neighboring lands. The kingdom's strategic position meant it was often a battleground, but also a buffer zone protecting Western Europe from the eastern nomadic tribes and later the Mongols. Its fortresses, scattered across rolling hills and river valleys, were bastions of resistance, their walls tested repeatedly in sieges that shaped the fate of Eastern Europe. Despite its strengths, the kingdom's fortunes fluctuated as the political landscape shifted. The rise of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania brought a new power into the region, with Lithuanian princes often intermarrying with Galician nobility. The Mongol yoke, though never fully crushing, imposed tribute demands that strained the kingdom's resources. Polish and Hungarian ambitions pressed from the west, while internal succession disputes occasionally weakened central authority. By the late 14th century, Galicia, Volhynius' independence waned. Following the death of its last ruling prince, the kingdom was absorbed into the expanding Polish and Lithuanian states through a series of dynastic marriages, treaties, and conquests. This transition did not erase Galicia, Volhynius' identity. Instead, it became a cultural and political bridge between East Slavic lands and Western Europe. Its Orthodox traditions influenced the religious life of the region, while its legal codes and administrative practices were integrated into the governing structures of Poland-Lithuania. The legacy of Galicia, Volhynia endures in modern Eastern Europe. Today's Western Ukraine, parts of Poland, and Belarus bear the imprint of this medieval kingdom's cultural and historical heritage. The name Galicia itself, though contested over centuries, recalls a proud chapter of Slavic resilience and statehood. Scholars and historians recognize Galicia, Volhynia, as a pivotal player in the medieval geopolitics of Europe, a kingdom that for a time carved out a realm of strength and culture in the turbulent crossroads of empires. In many ways, Galicia, Volhynia was a kingdom of thresholds between East and West, paganism and Christianity, nomadic and settled cultures. It was a place where alliances were forged in fire and faith, where the echoes of ancient Slavic rites mingled with the chants of Latin masses. It was a realm defined not by grand monuments or sprawling cities, but by the resilience of its people and the tenacity of its rulers. To remember the kingdom of Galicia, Volhynia, is to remember a forgotten but vital thread in the tapestry of European history. It reminds us that power once thrived in places now considered periphery, that kingdoms rose and fell in the shadows of greater empires, but left legacies that still shape identities and borders today. That history is not merely the story of the victorious and famous, but also of the fierce, proud peoples who carved their own destinies against overwhelming odds. And so, when one looks upon the rivers that flow through western Ukraine, or the forests that blanket its hills, one might hear the distant echo of galloping riders, the solemn toll of church bells, or the whispered prayers of a kingdom that once was Galicia, Volhynia, the Slavic kingdom that dared to stand apart, that fought to live free, and that remains alive in the hearts of its descendants. Long after the pyramids had turned to ruins and Rome had turned to ash, in a harsh stretch of land between the Sahara and the Nile, there rose a kingdom most today have never heard of. It was not built to conquer the world, but to hold its ground. And hold it did for nearly 7 centuries. This was Makuria, a Christian kingdom in the heart of Africa that withstood the tides of empire, the sweep of Islam, and the erosion of time itself. Makuria was not born in opulence or safety. It emerged in Nubia, a land of burning deserts and fertile rivers, of ancient temples and forgotten gods. As the Roman Empire faded and Byzantium struggled to keep its borders intact, Makuria rose from the ashes of earlier Nubian polities, inheriting their culture, their memory, and their resilience. By the 6th century CE, it had embraced Christianity not as a borrowed faith, but as its own, reshaped in Nubian hands, painted in Nubian colors, spoken in Nubian tongues. And then came Islam. In the 7th century, the Arab caliphate surged out of the Arabian Peninsula like a desert storm, sweeping across the Middle East and North Africa with dizzying speed. Persia fell. Egypt fell. The Mediterranean world trembled. The armies of Islam marched south along the Nile, certain that the land beyond Egypt would fall just as easily. They were wrong. When Muslim forces reached Makuria in 651, they encountered not scattered tribes or weary peasants, but an organized kingdom with a deadly reputation. Makurian archers, famed even by their enemies, met them with a barrage of precision so fierce it left Arab historians stunned. They struck eyes from a distance. They broke formations with a single volley. The caliph's soldiers, seasoned in the conquest of empires, could not break Makuria's lines. The war ended not with conquest, but with negotiation, and what followed was almost unheard of. The Pact, a treaty of mutual non-aggression between a Muslim empire and a Christian African kingdom. Under its terms, Makuria would not be attacked, so long as it sent a regular tribute to Egypt in the form of slaves and goods. No forced conversions, no occupation, no destruction. The peace held for nearly 600 years. In that time, Makuria flourished. Its capital, Old Dongola, became a jewel in the desert, a city of stone churches, painted sanctuaries, and sunlit towers. Frescoes of Christ, Mary, saints, and angels adorned its churches, but these were not the pale, Hellenistic faces of Byzantium. These were Nubians, dark-skinned, solemn, radiant. The saints had wide eyes and broad features. Heaven looked like home. Makuria was not just a spiritual power. It was a literate, artistic, and sophisticated state. Its scribes wrote in Old Nubian, a language that fused Greek, Coptic, and local tongues into something uniquely African. Its kings ruled through a mixture of monarchy and clergy. Its monasteries were centers of learning and political influence. The church was not an appendage. It was the backbone of the kingdom. And yet, despite its cultural richness, Makuria never sought to dominate its neighbors. It ruled not through conquest, but by surviving where others fell. It did not go to war to spread its religion. It fought only when provoked. It was not an empire. It was a bastion. a line in the sand that would not move. But time, unlike armies, does not negotiate. In the 13th century, the old balance began to crumble. A Makurian king named David, defiant in the face of growing Arab influence, launched a raid into Egypt. The retaliation was swift and devastating. Muslim forces sacked Old Dongola, and although Makuria survived the assault, it would never fully recover. Internal divisions followed. Puppet rulers were installed. Nobles turned on each other. What had once been a unified kingdom began to fracture. And even worse than war was the slow erosion of identity. Arab settlers and traders moved south. They did not come with swords, but with language, marriage, and faith. Islam crept in not through battle, but through families. The people of Makuria gradually changed, not in a day, not in a year, but in a generation. Arabic replaced Old Nubian. Mosques replaced churches. One day, without war or drama, the kingdom simply faded into something else. By the 15th century, Makuria was gone. Its kings forgotten, its capital abandoned. The churches turned to dust. The frescoes peeled from their walls. The treaty that had once stunned the world was buried under centuries of silence. And yet, not everything was lost. In the 20th century, as archaeologists unearthed the churches of Faris before they were drowned by rising waters, they discovered the saints of Makuria once again. Angels with dark skin, bishops in jeweled robes, eyes wide with divine fire. They stare from the walls of a forgotten world, not pleading, not mourning, but watching. Makuria did not fall in glory. It did not end in fire. It was not destroyed, it was worn away. But that does not make its story any less heroic. For nearly 700 years, it stood at the edge of an empire and refused to bow. It kept its faith not with armies, but with conviction. It built a civilization not on expansion, but on endurance. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not in textbooks, not in movies, but in the stones of Old Dongola, in the ruined apses of Faris, in the silent gaze of saints painted on mud brick walls. Makuria whispers, not shouts. It says, we were here, we believed, we endured, and that perhaps is the quietest kind of greatness, the kind that doesn't need to be remembered to have mattered, the kind that stands its ground long after the noise of history fades away. Before coins clinked in a purse, before wealth could be counted or held in the palm of one's hand, there was gold that flowed like water from a river in western Anatolia. And there, among rolling hills and sun-baked plains, rose a kingdom where the idea of money itself was born. Lydia, not just a place of riches, but the birthplace of measured value, of minted ambition, a land where myth and innovation walked side by side. Lydia did not announce itself with conquest. It emerged from the tapestry of Bronze Age cultures in Asia Minor, Hatteians, Luwians, and other ancient peoples, slowly coalescing into a kingdom during the Iron Age. The Greeks told stories of its founding by a man named Leitus, son of Hades, and from him the land took its name. But this was no myth alone. Archaeology confirms a kingdom existed here by at least the 8th century BCE, ruled from its capital, Sardis, a city that shimmered like gold and rose like a challenge at the foot of Mount Molus. Sardis was no ordinary city. It was a fortress, a market, and a palace all at once. The Acropolis, perched on a steep hill, looked down like a god surveying the world. Below, the Pactolus River ran through the valley, a river legendary not for its length, but for its wealth. Its sands were flecked with electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. The Lydians, more than any who came before them, learned how to harness this glittering current. And with that knowledge, they changed the world. In the 7th century BCE, under King Alyattes and his even more famous son Croesus, Lydia began minting the first known coins in human history, stamped with royal symbols, made from refined electrum. No longer would wealth be measured in weighed ingots or livestock. Now it could be standardized, carried, exchanged. The world of trade became faster, broader, more ambitious. The Lydians had invented trust in metal, the ability to give a stamped disc and know what it meant. It was no small thing. It was revolution disguised as currency. But Lydia was more than gold. It stood at the crossroads of civilizations. To the east, the Medes and Persians. To the west, the Greek city-states of Ionia. It was a place where cultures collided, merged, and reshaped each other. The Lydians spoke an Indo-European language, but they borrowed gods from the Greeks, deities from the Hittites, symbols from the East. Their art was a blend of realism and ritual, of lion motifs and winged creatures, carved in stone and painted on walls. Their buildings had the grandeur of empire, though they ruled no empire of their own, just a kingdom rich enough to make others wary. King Alyattes, who reigned in the early 6th century BCE, was both warrior and reformer. He fought the Cimmerians, fierce nomads who had swept into Anatolia, burning cities and toppling kings. Alyattes drove them out, secured Lydia's frontiers, and expanded his influence over Western Asia Minor. But his real legacy was strategic stability. He established diplomatic ties with nearby Greek cities, sometimes by marriage, sometimes by siege. The Greeks, though wary, respected him. Lydia became a kind of bridge between Greek and Eastern worlds, neither entirely one nor the other. Then came Croesus. His name still echoes through history like a proverb. As rich as Croesus, they say, and with good reason. Under Croesus, Lydia reached the height of its power. Sardis glittered with unprecedented luxury. Palaces of stone and wood, walls thick with murals, gardens fragrant with imported flowers. But Croesus was not content with wealth alone. He wanted legacy. He wanted glory. And so, like so many rulers before and after him, he turned his gaze to prophecy. According to Herodotus, Croesus sent envoys to the great oracles of the ancient world, asking what would happen if he went to war with Persia. The oracle at Delphi, sly as ever, replied that if he crossed the river Halys, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus took this as divine approval. He marched east, confident, armored in gold and destiny. He destroyed an empire, all right, his own. The Persians, under Cyrus the Great, proved to be more than a match. They moved fast, fought harder, and played for keeps. The Lydians were brave, their cavalry swift, their archers deadly. But Persia was something new, a rising superpower fueled by vision and fire. The two forces clashed at the Battle of Thymbra in 547 BCE. Croesus was defeated, Sardis besieged. Within days, the city that had minted the first coin fell to an army that would soon reshape the known world. Croesus was captured, and the stories diverge. Some say he was burned alive, only to be spared by a last-minute rain sent by Apollo. Others claim Cyrus, impressed by his wisdom, kept him on as an advisor. Either way, Croesus survived. His kingdom did not. And yet, Lydia was not erased. The Persians absorbed it, respected it, and even used its coinage systems. Sardis became a Persian satrapal capital. The Great Royal Road, stretching from Susa to Sardis, was built by Darius I, connecting the vast empire from east to west, and it began in the former Lydian heartland. Lydia became a crucial province, a gem in the Achaemenid crown. And in the centuries that followed, through Persian rule, then Alexander's conquest, then Roman domination, the memory of Lydia remained. Coins continued to circulate long after their kings had fallen. Greek poets still spoke of Croesus and his hubris. Historians debated whether he was wise or foolish, devout or doomed. But no one denied he was unforgettable. Even in death, Lydia whispered to those who came after. In the ruins of Sardis, archaeologists have found the remnants of a people who lived at the hinge of worlds. The oldest known gymnasium in Anatolia, Roman temples built over Lydian foundations, Byzantine churches tucked beside forgotten Persian barracks. Layers upon layers of empire, but Lydia lies at the base. Today, the Pactolus River still flows. Its sands no longer shine with gold, but they remember. If you walk the valley near Sardis, the ruins lie quiet but proud. Stone walls, weathered and broken, rise from fields of silence. They do not shout their history. They do not need to. Lydia gave the world a tool so powerful, so ordinary, we forget it had to be invented. Before banks, before credit, before the rise and fall of modern economies, there was the Lydian coin. Before money could change hands, Lydia changed the idea of value itself. And in doing so, it carved its name not just in stone, but in every transaction since. It did not last. No kingdom does. But to measure Lydia by its fall would be to misunderstand it entirely. Lydia was not about conquest. It was about invention. Its riches were not just gold, but the idea that gold could become something more. And that idea, that still rules the world. It began in the scent of crushed cloves and the humid breath of jungle. In a land where volcanoes smoke above rice terraces and rivers shimmer like serpents through emerald valleys. Java, the heart of the archipelago. It was here at the end of the 13th century that a kingdom rose like a thunderclap from the ruins of another. Not merely a kingdom of swords and palaces, but a maritime empire born on sails and ambition. Majapahit, a name that once meant bitter Maya fruit, but would come to taste of power, trade, and glory. The winds that carried its ships began with the fall of Singasari, a Javanese kingdom brought low by rebellion and Mongol miscalculation. In 1292, Kublai Khan sent an armada to punish Singasari's king for a diplomatic slight. But the king was already dead, assassinated by a usurper named Jayakatwang. Into this chaos stepped Radin Wijaya, a prince with patience like steel and vision like fire. He played the Mongols and Jayakatwang against each other, then turned on the Mongols themselves once their usefulness had run dry. When the dust settled, both the invaders and the usurper were gone, and Radin crowned himself the first king of a new order. Majapahit. At first, it was just a name, a palace hidden in the lowlands near the Brandas River, surrounded by groves of the bitter Maya tree. But it grew, slowly then suddenly, under Radin, and more so under his descendants. Majapahit became a web stretching across the sea. Its core was Java, but its reach extended across Sumatra, Bali, Borneo, the Malay Peninsula, and far beyond. It did not conquer with brute force alone. It seduced with spice, with silk, with marriage alliances and tributary deals. Where its ships landed, its culture followed. And so too did its language, its architecture, its gods. This was an empire of ports, not pyramids. A thalassocracy, a sea kingdom. Its fleets moved with the monsoons, weaving trade routes through the coral labyrinth of Southeast Asia. Chinese ceramics, Indian cloth, Arabian horses, Javanese spices, all passed through Majapahit hands. And every transaction built its wealth. Every harbor made it stronger. The Indian Ocean was its arena, and the winds were its ally. But empires are not built by winds alone. They require minds. And Majapahit had Gajamata. He began as a palace guard, a mere soldier with burning eyes, and rose to become Mahapati, the prime minister, the real power behind the throne. In 1336, Gajamata took a solemn oath, the Sampapalapa, declaring that he would not taste any spice or indulgence until all of Nusantara, the Indonesian archipelago, was united under Majapahit rule. It was a vow that stunned the court. Bold, arrogant, unthinkable. But Gajamata was not like other men. For decades, he pursued that dream. Through war and diplomacy, through fleets and treaties, Gajamata expanded Majapahit's influence to heights never before imagined. Tribes of Kalimantan, kings of Sumatra, even the sultanates of the Malay world bowed in reluctant homage. Some offered tribute, some offered daughters in marriage, others only resistance and learned to regret it. Gajamata ruled like a shadow king, and under him Majapahit stood like a colossus astride the seas. And yet, ambition has its cost. In 1357, at the wedding of a Majapahit princess to a Sundanese prince, disaster struck. A massacre, born of protocol, pride, and miscommunication, claimed the lives of the bride's family and shocked the court. Gajamata was blamed. His star fell. He withdrew from power, though the kingdom he helped build still stood for a time. The golden age of Majapahit is often dated to the reign of Hayam Wuruk, the king who ruled alongside Gajamata. Together, they were architect and builder, one dreaming of unity, the other embodying it. Under Hayam Wuruk, Majapahit became not just powerful, but radiant. Its court in Trowulan was a marvel of terracotta and waterworks, of ceremonial gardens and vast audience halls. Its poets composed epics like the Nagara Kritagama, a hymn to the kingdom's greatness, listing its territories like stars in a constellation. Religion flowed like a braided river through Majapahit's life. Hinduism and Buddhism intermingled, not as rivals, but as intertwined truths. Temples rose in the countryside, carved with gods whose limbs were vines and whose faces were serene. Shiva, Vishnu, Buddha, all were worshipped. Syncretism was not a compromise here. It was a harmony, a balance, a reflection of the world's diversity under one crown. But time is a river that washes even the greatest kingdoms away. After Hayam Warwick's death in 1389, succession disputes began to eat at the foundations. The empire was too vast, its rulers too divided. Vassals drifted, pirates rose. Islam began to spread more widely across the archipelago, carried by traders and missionaries from Arabia and India. As new sultanates formed on Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, Majapahit's influence waned. Trade shifted to ports beyond its reach. Its once mighty fleets became relics. Its tributaries stopped paying tribute. By the early 1500s, Majapahit was a memory. Its capital, once the beating heart of the empire, fell into ruin. The jungle crept in, swallowing bricks and bones alike. Its last remnants were said to flee east to Bali, carrying with them the rituals, dances, and epics of a vanishing age. In Bali, echoes of Majapahit would survive in temple design, in gamelan music, in the sacred shadow plays of Wayang Kulit. But the empire itself was gone, and yet, like the scent of clove in the evening air, it lingers. Modern Indonesia looks back to Majapahit not as a lost kingdom, but as a foundation. Its emblem, the Garuda, a mythical bird, is Indonesia's national symbol. The idea of Nusantara, of a unified archipelago, is drawn straight from Gajah Mada's dream. Even the concept of national unity and diversity has its roots in that syncretic multicultural chord in Trowulan, where Sanskrit and Javanese mingled, where gods shared temples, where ships returned bearing stories from 100 shores. Majapahit did not conquer the world. It did not leave pyramids or columns or scrolls gilded in gold, but it left something subtler, a shape in the sea, an idea of unity, a model of how a civilization can rule not through walls, but through water. It mastered the rhythm of monsoons, the pulse of trade, the diplomacy of culture. And in the end, it left a whisper that still moves with the tide. Majapahit, bitter fruit, golden legacy. High in the Pontic Mountains where the forests spill like waves into the Black Sea, there was once a city of gold-roofed palaces and cliff-hung monasteries, of scholars and soldiers and exiles who refused to let the Roman dream die. Trebizond, a name now wrapped in mist, but once spoken with pride in the markets of Venice, the courts of Persia, and the halls of Constantinople. A last ember of Byzantium, flickering on the edge of the world, too distant to be extinguished easily, too proud to forget who it was. The story of Trebizond does not begin in triumph, but in collapse. In 1204, the unthinkable happened. Constantinople, the queen of cities, fell not to Muslim armies, but to Latin crusaders. Christian warriors, diverted from their holy mission, sacked the heart of Eastern Christendom. The Byzantine Empire shattered like stained glass. Out of its shards rose successor states, Nicaea, Epirus, and in the far northeast, beyond the mountains and near the Georgian frontier, Trebizond. It was not born merely of survival, but of blood, imperial blood. Two grandsons of Emperor Andronikos I Komnenos, Alexios and David, fled to Georgia after their grandfather was brutally overthrown in Constantinople. Their mother's cousin was Queen Tamar of Georgia, one of the most formidable monarchs in history. With her backing, the brothers returned to the Black Sea coast and seized the city of Trebizond in 1204, just as Constantinople burned. Alexios crowned himself emperor, not king, not prince, and declared his realm the true heir of Rome. To most, this was laughable. Trebizond was a city at the edge of nowhere. But it had something empires need more than pride: location. Nestled on the Black Sea's southern shore, at the terminus of the Silk Road's northern branch, Trebizond became a golden hinge between east and west. Caravans arrived from Persia and Central Asia laden with silk, gems, and spices. Genoese and Venetian merchants crowded its docks. Persian ambassadors walked its mosaic halls. And in the hills, Orthodox monks carved entire chapels in the cliffs, their frescoes like stars trapped in stone. Trebizond became more than a city. It became a symbol, a Byzantium in miniature, a defiant echo of Rome, still singing in Greek. It was a realm of mountains and merchants, scholars and saints. Its emperors styled themselves megas komnenos, the great Komneni, clinging to the ancient titles even as their world shrank. But what Trebizond lacked in size, it made up for in splendor. The city itself shimmered, not sprawling like Constantinople, but exquisite, intimate. Its churches were carved with care, its palaces gilded, its courts steeped in ritual older than the Crusades. The Hagia Sophia of Trebizond stood like a jewel beside the sea, a smaller sister to the one in the capital, adorned with mosaics that caught light like prayer. And yet, for all its beauty, Trebizond was never truly safe. It was ringed by rivals. To the west, the Empire of Nicaea, determined to reclaim Constantinople and the Byzantine legacy for itself. To the east, the Seljuk Turks and later the Mongols, whose raids turned the mountain passes into killing grounds. To the south, Armenia and Georgia, at times allies, at others entangled in their own wars and dynastic spirals. Trebizond endured, not through conquest, but through cleverness. It played powers against each other, offered tribute when needed, and hosted diplomats from Baghdad to Venice. There was something chameleonic about Trebizond. It spoke Greek in its court, but Persian in its markets. Its emperors married Georgian and Turkish princesses, adopted Eastern court rituals, and even employed Islamic guards in their palaces. In the hills above, Christian monasteries stood like fortresses, while below, mosques rose from Muslim merchants. Trebizond did not fear contradiction. It embraced it, and through all this it persisted. There were emperors of brilliance, like Alexios III, who reigned for over 40 years and turned Trebizond into a cultural beacon. Poets wrote epics in praise of the empire's longevity. Monks illuminated scrolls, preserving Greek texts that would vanish elsewhere. Astronomers tracked stars over the Black Sea. Women, especially noble women, wielded unusual power, acting as regents, patrons of the arts, and even commanders during sieges. The empire was small, but vibrant, alive in every corner. But time moves like tide, and the waters were rising. In 1261, the Latin Empire in Constantinople fell, and the Byzantines, now led by the Palaiologos dynasty, reclaimed the ancient capital. Suddenly, Trebizond's claim to be the true Roman Empire rang hollow. The emperors in Constantinople never forgot the audacity of their cousins in the east. Yet Trebizond survived, clinging to its independence like ivy to a ruined wall. The 14th century brought both bloom and rot. Trade flourished. The city grew wealthy on the backs of Genoese shipping and Persian silk. But the Mongols loomed to the east, and plague crept along trade routes like a shadow. Civil war tore the empire from within. Emperors rose and fell, some poisoned, some exiled. And all the while, a new power stirred in Anatolia, the Ottomans. By the mid-15th century, the world had changed. Constantinople, the great beacon of Orthodox Christianity, fell in 1453 to Mehmed II. The city became Istanbul. The last Byzantine emperor died, sword in hand, and Trebizond suddenly, terribly, became the last independent Greek state in the world. It was no longer a successor. It was a relic. For 8 years it endured, a city wrapped in stone walls and nostalgia. Its emperor, David Komnenos, tried desperately to save it, forging alliances with Catholic powers, sending envoys to Hungary and the Pope. But the West was weary of crusades, and no help came. In 1461, Mehmed returned, not as a raider, but as a sultan of destiny. His fleet landed, his armies surrounded the city, and after a brief siege, Trebizond surrendered. There was no glorious last stand, no fire in the temples, just silence. David was taken to Constantinople, then executed with his sons. The libraries were looted, the palaces plundered. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque. And yet, as with all things Roman, the death was not complete. Trebizond lingered, in memory, in poetry, in the ghost of empire that never quite leaves the stones. The monasteries of Sumala still cling to the cliffs. Greek fishermen in the Black Sea still tell tales of lost emperors. In the Renaissance, Italian scholars unearthed Byzantine manuscripts that may have passed through Trebizond's hands. Even today, in the quiet highlands of Turkey's northeast, you can find ruins where the wind still whispers in Greek. Trebizond was never meant to survive, and yet it did for 257 years. Longer than most nations, longer than reason allowed. It was not a mistake of history. It was a defiance, a prayer made empire, a flickering light that burned long after the sun had set on Byzantium. Before the legions of Rome marched across the Mediterranean, before Carthage became a memory, and long before the Byzantine eagle took flight, there was a kingdom in the wild, mountainous northwest of Greece that dared to dream big. Not Athens with its philosophers, not Sparta with its spears, but Epirus, a land of oracles and warriors, of dense forests and jagged passes, where kings spoke in Greek but fought like barbarians, and where ambition burned bright in a world constantly shifting. Epirus was never meant to be center stage. It was a borderland, a frontier between Greece and Illyria, where tribal clans held sway and kings were chosen by councils. Yet this very roughness made it resilient. While the polished cities of southern Greece squabbled over democracy and drama, Epirus watched and waited. Its people were Greek, Yes, but of a different shade. Proud Molossians, Chaonians, Thesprotians, mountain-born and hard-edged, shaped by hardship, not by elegance. Their myths claimed descent from Achilles. Their priests spoke the will of Zeus at Dodona, the oldest oracle in the Greek world, where sacred oaks whispered answers in the wind. For centuries, Epirus existed in the background, respected but not feared. That changed in the 4th century BCE, when one family rose above the rest, the Aeacids. They claimed blood ties to Achilles himself, and their ambition stretched far beyond their highland homeland. And among them, one name would echo far beyond the valleys of Epirus, Pyrrhus, Pyrrhus of Epirus, a name like thunder in the early 3rd century BCE. He was not born to power, but clawed his way to it, exiled, restored, and forged in fire. He was the cousin of Alexander the Great, and, some said, his spiritual heir. Tall, charismatic, brilliant in battle, Pyrrhus had the sort of restless energy that could move nations or burn them down. War was his language, and the world his battlefield. He looked east and west and saw a map of opportunity. Macedonia was in chaos after Alexander's death. Pyrrhus marched in and claimed it, only to lose it days later. No matter, there was always another war. He fought Demetrius, Antigonus, Lysimachus, names that shook the Hellenistic world. But Pyrrhus wasn't content to be a regional player. He wanted legacy. And so, when Greek cities in southern Italy cried out for help against the rising Roman Republic, Pyrrhus answered. He crossed the Ionian Sea with 20,000 men and 20 war elephants, beasts the Romans had never faced, and landed in Tarentum. It was the beginning of one of the most storied military campaigns in ancient history. He won. He won again. But each victory cost him dearly. Heraclea, Asculum. The Romans bled, but kept coming. When congratulated after one particularly brutal battle, Pyrrhus is said to have muttered, "Another such victory, and we are lost." Thus was born the phrase, a Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly it becomes a loss. Pyrrhus was many things, a general, a dreamer, a conqueror, a king. He marched into Sicily, took on Carthage, returned to Greece, and fought one final war in Argos, where he died in street combat, struck not by a sword, but by a roof tile hurled by an old woman. A strange, quiet end to a life lived so loudly. With Pyrrhus died the grandest ambitions of Epirus, but the kingdom endured. For a time, it even flourished. Pyrrhus's descendants ruled a powerful realm, one of the strongest in Greece during the turbulent years of the 3rd century BC. Epirus played politics with the great powers, allying with Macedonia, quarreling with Aetolia, resisting the pull of Rome even as that new empire loomed like a storm cloud on the western horizon. In 232 BCE, the last Aeacid king died, and the Epirote League was formed, a confederation of cities and tribes. It was more democratic in form, less stable in practice. The League tried to navigate the shifting alliances of the Hellenistic world, but it lacked the cohesion that a strong king had once brought. And then came Rome. When the Second Macedonian War broke out, Epirus tried to stay neutral, but neutrality in that age was dangerous. Rome crushed Macedonia, and Epirus? At first it was spared, but not for long. In 167 BCE, The Epirotes made the fatal mistake of siding with the anti-Roman cause. Rome responded with cold efficiency. The Roman general Aemilius Paulus marched into Epirus and unleashed one of the most brutal retributions in Greek history. 70 towns were sacked. Over 150,000 people, men, women, children, were enslaved. The kingdom of Epirus was no more. Its cities were left in ruin, its people scattered, its legacy reduced to a cautionary tale in Roman annals. And yet, like all ancient lands with deep roots, Epirus did not vanish. Its memory lingered in ruins, in rituals, in the stories whispered beneath the oaks of Dodona. Roman settlers came, but the language of the mountains endured. Byzantine garrisons would later occupy the old hill forts. In the medieval era, Despotate of Epirus would rise from the ashes, another claimant to the legacy of Byzantium after the fall of Constantinople in 1204. Echoes of Pyrrhus and the Aeacids still danced in the stones. Today, the region of Epirus spans modern Greece and Albania, its name a quiet trace of a kingdom that once dared to challenge Rome, stand beside Alexander, and believe, even if only for a moment, that a small mountain realm could shape the course of the world. Because Epirus was never about size. It was about spirit, about the defiant will to fight, even when victory is fleeting. Pyrrhus did not win an empire, but he won a place in history. And in doing so, he gave Epirus something greater than territory. He gave it myth. And sometimes myth outlives all empires.